Well, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I bring you greetings from the people of Vanuatu, and at the outset, let me allow me to thank the Stop Ecocide International Plus for organizing this very important virtual meeting. As you all know, Vanuatu is one of the world's small island developing states, but perhaps we are better referred to as big ocean states. As a big ocean state, as only 1.8% of our sovereign boundary is land above water. And this is hugely relevant to today's event addressing protection of the planet's waters. In particular, it is difficult to overstate the importance of the ocean to Vanuatu, to the people of other ocean states, and to the maintenance of life on this planet. The ocean is part of us. It is our heritage, it is our culture, it is inextricably woven through our lives and beings. Our very Melanesian indigenous identity comes from a deep connection to the ocean, which feeds us and sustains us. And can you imagine how it feels to the Vanuatu people to see the actions of others, often on the other side of the planet, cause our own ocean to rise, taking away our livelihoods, our land, and our lives. Vanuatu is already the world's most vulnerable to natural disasters, owing to our geography, and we are also among the world's most climate vulnerable. It is not just changes to sea level we feel here daily. Ocean acidification is dissolving our reefs, sea surface temperatures are bleaching our corals, and Category 5 cyclones are tearing apart our maritime infrastructure. And responsible for less than 0.001% of emissions, there is very little we can do other than continue to plan for worsening devastation and beginning to look for new ways to adapt and to survive. That is the reality. And we know that the harm being long felt by indigenous tribes in Vanuatu is also now being felt by people across the planet, even in the richest and most industrialized countries, the source of the state and corporate actions that have caused and continue to expand this crisis. The destruction of our ocean and the coastal river and ice systems of the earth is a death sentence for all of humanity. And these systems maintain the balance of climate and livability for us as humans, as well as countless other living beings. And that is why Vanuatu is leaving no stone unturned to establish protection for the living world, well beyond our own islands, in a way that must not be subject to the short election cycles that drive national politics or the corporate greed that hinders the ambition that is required. As a key element of changing behavior, we believe international law is fundamentally important. The international events that have taken place the last 12 months are a stark reminder that upholding the rule of international law is important to the survival of our global community. We collectively set the rules and we live by them, holding each other to account when these norms are breached. So the rule of law is foundational to the United Nations and its mission of peace. From the smallest village in Vanuatu to the largest cities, the rule of law is all that stands between peace and instability, climate resilience, and catastrophe. You may have already heard that Vanuatu is championing an international legal initiative requesting the United Nations International Court of Justice to clarify the consequences under existing international law for states that cause significant harm to the climate system and other parts of the environment. So to ask the court this question, Vanuatu will very soon table a resolution at the UN General Assembly and is currently asking all countries to support and even co-sponsor it. Already, many dozens of countries from developed world have formally registered their co-sponsorship. To date, we have about 116, but we welcome more to ensure the resolution is adopted and states get the clarity from the ICJ needed to make better domestic decisions. Another initiative, Vanuatu, alongside a group of like-minded nations, has also submitted a request for guidance from the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea on how greenhouse gas emissions are linked to obligations under UNCLOS. But these measures are looking at international treaties and conventions that already exist. instruments that have clear gaps because they were written well before the climate crisis began to be felt in all countries and finally acknowledged by world leaders. So Vanuatu is of the view that we must fill gaps in international law so as to safeguard the future, protect our planet, and finally put in place a genuine and enforceable deterrent to egregious and destructive environmental practices. Vanuatu is now leading the initiative to criminalize ecocide, which is defined as unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. Criminalizing ecocide as a fifth crime under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court should be a globally demanded amendment to international law. We aim to include ecocide alongside the most heinous activities known on our planet: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. Vanuatu is not a backward-looking proposal to punish, shame, or blame states for actions in the distant past. Rather, we see that international criminal law has forward-looking preventative power and will create the necessary global framework for decision makers to exercise proper caution and due diligence. With the crime of ecocide, the global community will set the guardrails of acceptable behavior towards the environment, which 99.9% of states and enterprises are de facto already upholding. But for the minority who continue to decimate biodiversity, threaten key marine ecosystems, and exacerbate climate change, the strong boundaries and legal consequences of ecocide will present an existential guardrail. Vanuatu is proud to be a leader on the criminalization of ecocide. Ours was the first country to officially raise this possibility at the International Criminal Court in 2019, and we've raised it in many international fora since, from the COP talks to the UN General Assembly. And we welcome additional states to this movement as we welcome the support of civil society. We anticipate that all those concerned with the protection of the planet's rivers, coastal waters, glaciers, and seas will support this law and be only too glad to enable its adoption. I wish you rich discussions at the event today. Thank you, Tomas.
Thank you, Mr. Kalsakau. As you can hear, Vanuatu is leading on climate change solutions at the global level. Vanuatu's ministers, ambassadors, and other diplomats have regularly co-hosted events with the Stop Ecocide Foundation in many high-level contexts, including at the recent climate change and biodiversity COPs. Their leadership on the world stage inspires us all. Now, our first panelist today will give us a broad background and rationale behind the fast-growing initiative to criminalize ecocide and provide a sense of the relevance at the UN 2023 Water Conference. Jojo Mehta co-founded Stop Ecocide in 2017, alongside Scottish barrister and legal pioneer, the late Polly Higgins, to support making severe harm to nature an international crime. A key spokesperson and executive director of Stop Ecocide International, Jojo has overseen the remarkable growth of the global movement while coordinating legal developments, diplomatic traction, and the public narrative. She is also chair of the charitable Stop Ecocide Foundation, which is co-hosting today, and was convener of the independent expert panel for the legal definition of ecocide, chaired by Philippe Sands and Dior Fall-So. And by the way, two of our speakers today, Sayeda Rizwana Hassan and Julio Prieto, were directly involved in that drafting process. So Jojo, tell us, what is ecocide? Why is it so important? And what is there to know about the approach of this law and how it can protect water?
Thank you so much, Grant. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. It's an honor to be part of this official UN Water Conference program and also to be in such remarkable and expert company for this event. At Stop Ecocide International, our core work is to inform, to connect, and to gather support across governments and many sectors of civil society to actively progress the recognition of ecocide, which is to say severe and either widespread or long-term damage to nature as an international crime. Water is the lifeblood of the earth, and like our blue planet, we are largely made up of it ourselves. Our lives and bodies depend upon unpolluted, safe water, and so does the life of the planet. While the indigenous guardians of many of the world's most vital ecosystems have never lost sight of this and profoundly know that water is life, our globally dominant economic culture has lost touch with this basic understanding in our rush for development, production, and wealth creation. We are now reaping the grievous, if unintended, consequences. We are either threatening or already creating severe and even irreparable damage, turning a blind eye to destruction or justifying it in the light of perceived needs or desired profits. That this attitude is so widespread signals not so much a class of supervillains as the logical conclusion of a mindset of separation, competition, and domination that has been centuries in the making and has led us to a point of critical unsustainability, to the global ecological and climate crisis in which we find ourselves. We all know you can't build your business model on killing people. It would be criminal and criminally insane. But we simply don't take the earth herself seriously enough to recoil in the same way from destroying and polluting her. What is missing to create that crucial steer? We know that multilateral agreements and pledges, while important in the specifics, have not been able to effectively put the brakes on destruction or create the pace of change and shift of attitude needed. And this is where criminal law, and specifically the recognition of ecocide at the international level, can make a profound difference by drawing a moral and legal red line that extends beyond and across jurisdictional boundaries. Because the true function of criminal law is protective. Murder isn't a crime in order to punish murderers, it's a crime in order to stop people being killed. In other words, to protect. There is a far greater incentive to adhere to regulations, quotas, the precautionary principle, far greater incentive to engage in the right kind of due diligence. Indeed, to explore strategic positive change when failing to do so could lead into the territory of international crime. And while ecocide law is still a relatively new concept in the public mind, it's an initiative that is rapidly gathering momentum at the diplomatic level. In 2019, no governments were known to be talking about it. Now, following the lead taken by Vanuatu, at least 26 countries have discussion of criminalising ecocide on public record at parliament or government level, via government statements, parliamentary petitions, full proposals of law, and more. At the regional level, the EU is this year considering addressing ecocide in its revised directive on the protection of the environment through criminal law. 2.5 years ago, our foundation convened a panel of 12 top lawyers from around the world to spend 6 months drafting a legal definition of ecocide. And the core text, which they reached consensus on in June 2021, was the following. Ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there's a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. Now, this definition does not specifically target any particular industry. Instead, it addresses the level of harm or hazard, whatever the activity, and it applies to individuals in positions of superior responsibility, creating a clear steer at the highest levels of government and industry, exactly where it's most useful. It acknowledges that a large proportion of destructive practices are already unlawful, breaches of regulation, of rights frameworks, and so on, or that they are wantonly, disproportionately destructive. This definition has landed well in the political world, as it sanctions the threats of the worst harms while acknowledging and strengthening existing laws, which may vary between jurisdictions. And while drawing directly on legal language which is familiar from previous international treaties, it is also clearly understandable to you and me, and fits on the back of a business card, which is frankly handy when you're dealing with busy politicians. Indeed, in the 18 months since its launch, this consensus definition has become the de facto starting point for diplomatic and academic discussions worldwide. It has also inspired domestic proposals, most prominently in Belgium, where the government is in the process of legislating nationally. And last year, the conversation arrived at the UN level too. Our foundation was invited to host side events and run pavilions at a number of UN conferences, including the Climate COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, the Biodiversity COP15 in Montreal, and alongside the economic meetings in Davos. There is already a small group of states informally working together to progress discussion of adding ecocide to the list of crimes addressed at the International Criminal Court, being led by a long-standing ally and our co-host today, Vanuatu. And there is another advantage to this concise definition. In the hands of anyone who knows their own sector, it stimulates questions It provides a lens through which people can look to ask, what does my sector need to do in the light of this approaching law? And these are precisely the questions that need to be asked to stimulate positive change. So there is a readiness. Indeed, there's an appetite, both for creating accountability at the highest level and for framing what we need to change. And Ecocide law has the power to do both. I look forward to hearing from this remarkable range of fellow panelists today about their work and how they feel this law could be of relevance and support in that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jojo. We are not separate from water, nor can we have dominion over it. Humans are water, and water is life. Our laws must reflect this, and thanks to your work and the work of many others, this is beginning to happen. We have a truly global panel with us today, and our next speaker comes from one of the world's most climate vulnerable countries, where today's theme could not be more relevant. Sayeda Rizwana Hassan is a registered lawyer with the Supreme Court of Bangladesh and chief executive of the Bangladesh Environmental Lawyers Association. Her main focus is to promote the notion of environmental justice in Bangladesh. She has fought against vehicular pollution, river pollution, industrial pollution, shipbreaking, grabbing of wetlands, cutting of hills, unregulated mining, unplanned urbanization, commercial shrimp cultivation, deforestation, loss of biodiversity, and the list goes on. Her cases are redefining the current notion of development to address environmental considerations. As an anthropocentric environmentalist, her efforts are adding values to the conventional human rights movement by bringing in the elements of environmental justice. She was a member of the independent expert panel for the legal definition of ecocide convened by the Stop Ecocide Foundation. Rizwana, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Bangladesh, when that very name is pronounced, people would think that it's a country faced with floods, cyclones, tidal surges. So water is something that is very closely connected to the name of my country. Fact remains that Bangladesh is a creation of water. It is the largest river delta of the country. So our lives is directly dependent on the wetlands that surround us. Unfortunately, no single river looks the same it used to look 20 years back. The reason is rivers are taken as cesspools by the sewage authorities. Rivers and wetlands are taken as dumping grounds by the municipal authorities. Wetlands are taken as drainage system for the untreated poisonous waste of the industries. Against the continuous deterioration of our wetlands, the Supreme Court of Bangladesh has come forward and has declared that the rivers of the countries have to be treated as legal persons, living entities. And the Supreme Court went to an extent, the High Court rather, went to an extent to say that any individual who is involved in grabbing river land or encroaching upon river area will not be able to contest elections. So the Supreme Court of Bangladesh has upheld that part of the judgment that says that rivers and wetlands are living entities, but the other part which said that anyone who grabs river land will be barred from participating in election because it's a criminal offense. That part has been stayed by the Supreme Court because you know now who are the people who are encroaching river lands. If they don't contest the elections, perhaps the country will have real difficulty in finding candidates to contest elections. And 162 out of 300 of our parliament members come from a business background. So with that powerful judgment in hand, the fact remains that Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, has 7 rivers flowing through it and around it. With those 7 rivers flowing through the capital of Bangladesh, I don't know how many of the capitals in this world will have 7 rivers flowing through it. We actually, the people of Dhaka, the people of capital of this country, we can't drink our river water. We can't drink it even after treatment because we have polluted the rivers to a level that all of them have gone beyond treatment. And this is not only the reality of Dhaka, where you have industrial activity. This is the reality of the whole of Bangladesh. Not a single river can be used by the surrounding villagers for their daily needs. They have to be really investing significant amount of money to boil the water, to treat it in one way or the other. This means that huge amount of population of this country is deprived of their right to water. They don't have access to potable water. And this is interfering with their constitutionally recognized right to life. What does right to life mean if you don't have access to potable, clean water? This is one aspect of it, how pollution and encroachment and mining are killing our rivers. On the other side, we have the threats of climatic change. While we are having cyclones and tidal surges, the coastal part of Bangladesh is having salinity. With sea level rise, the sea is entering the river system, and the river water in the coastal part is getting salinated. And as a result, what's happening is people have started moving from the coastal district to the mainstream Bangladesh, but the women and girls are bearing the most brunt of it, because girls who are aged between, say, 12 to 18, they're taking birth control pills because they don't have access to water to afford regular period. Pregnant women, young mothers are getting eclampsia because they're forced to drink that salinated water. So there is every reason for someone like me as a Bangladeshi to demand that offenses against our rivers are criminalized and are effectively criminalized. Having said that, Bangladesh also has challenges with riparian states. We are the lower riparian, and out of around 260 rivers that we have, most of the rivers which we share with our neighbors like India and China. And if you have been following the UN Convention on International Watercourse, it was enacted in 1997, but it came into effect in 2014. And in all these years, it could only get 36 signatures, 36 ratifications that was required to bring it into effect, because upper riparian countries simply don't bother about how international watercourses will be used. And we do have mighty rivers in Bangladesh that are drying up because the upper riparians are diverting the river waters without any consultation with lower riparians whatsoever. So it is not only about not allowing a country to use its river system in a way that it will harm its neighbors, but it has to also take care of the fact that by utilizing river course in their part, they're eventually not leading to deaths of the entire river system, particularly when they share it with their neighbors. So I demand that offenses against our wetlands, natural wetlands and river systems are criminalized. I also demand that rights of rivers, rights of natural wetlands are recognized. The right of the rivers to flow without being polluted, without being mindlessly mined, and without being grabbed should be recognized in the legal documents. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And as you discussed, we really must begin to treat nature, and in particular aquatic ecosystems, not as a dumping ground, but as living entities that deserve some of the same basic rights that humans have, including protections from criminal acts. I do want to quickly remind everyone that you are welcome to put your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We are honored today to have some of many of the world's leading experts in these spaces who are ready to answer your questions, so it's a great opportunity. Now we move north to consider ecosystems which are undergoing drastic changes that will affect the rest of the world in ways most of us simply don't think about as it feels so remote. Professor Gail Whiteman is an expert on global risk arising from the systemic changes occurring in the natural environment. She is the founder of Arctic Base Camp and a professor of sustainability at the University of Exeter's Business School. Since 2012, she is the professor in residence at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. She is a past member of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Frontier Risk and was a science keynote speaker at the World Economic Forum's 2020 and 2023 sessions at Davos. Professor Whiteman is actively involved in building science-based targets for collective business action, including those for a future low-carbon economy. Her research analyzes how a range of actors, companies, civil society, and local communities make sense of ecological risk and how these actors transform and build resilience in the context of environmental pressures and social inequities. Professor, your expertise on the often little discussed ice systems is hugely relevant to today's discussion. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Grant, and hello, everybody. Apologies that my team has sent a very long bio there that I'm sure it was could have been shortened. So thanks for bearing with. Jojo, thanks very much for organizing this and inviting me. It's a delight to be here during this UN water meeting. Opening remarks from Mr. Kalsaku. Thank you so much for giving us that incredibly important perspective from Vanuatu. It's an honor to share the stage with you. Also, Saida, again, the same with Bangladesh. You know, Vanuatu and Bangladesh are on the front line. And these are really where the climate is hitting the road, so to speak. I want to talk though about the Arctic. As a Canadian, I'm from an Arctic country. I'm calling in today from Rotterdam, so I'm quite far from the Arctic. But the Arctic is really where all of us are. If we take a look at protecting our waters, the first point I'd like to make is that in the Arctic, many of the indigenous and local communities are facing similar challenges in terms of access to safe water and sanitation, especially indigenous groups in the north. Often do not have access to clean water and clean sanitation. So similar to some of the thoughts from Bangladesh, we're seeing that in the north as well. But the bulk of my conversation that I'd like to do today is really focusing about this issue of how the Arctic affects the world. And I wanted to start by saying that the title of Protecting Our Planet's Waters is, of course, bang on the money today, but at the same time, underneath that, or on top of that, is the word ice. Taking a look at what water looks like from the Arctic and also from the Antarctic perspective, it's frozen water that is also incredibly important. Now, the Arctic Ocean is not a big ocean. It's about 1% of the world's oceans. And it's kind of no surprise that when we see the world ocean conversation, the Arctic is not usually a key part of that. It's sort of often an afterthought because it's small. It is not the coral reef perspective, it is the ice. And sometimes people don't really understand that ice is in fact ocean in many cases in the Arctic. But the Arctic Ocean is important for many reasons, and not just for the polar bear or for local communities living in the north. First of all, it contains about a third of the world's coastline. It's an important part for coastal communities around the world, and also has a tremendous amount of the world's continental shelf, which is important for a lot of different reasons. It's ecologically important for local species. But the point that I want to make today is that the changes in the Arctic Ocean, including both the water and the ice, the frozen water on top, are driving the global risks, particularly around water and extreme weather around the world. So the things that are facing Vanuatu, that are facing Bangladesh, and that are facing California really have all the hallmarks of the changes to the Arctic water and ice system. Now, Arctic ice, it is vast. It is still there in the winter. Increasingly, we've lost a lot of it, though, since the 1970s. Research is showing we've lost about 50% in terms of the area, the extent how big it is. And if we look at volume, we've actually lost about 75% in the same time period, a little around 50 years. And as I said earlier, it's not just bad news for the polar bear. As the Arctic ice goes, it is changing the ocean circulation system, and it's also changing the jet stream. So we're getting this kind of strange extreme weather happening throughout, particularly the mid-latitudes, but increasingly changing the world's climate system. So as water in the Arctic changes, that is driving and amplifying global risks elsewhere. Science suggests that if we lose that ice and if we lose the snow on land, we're looking at about a magnification of global warming by about 25 to 40%. So very significant. On top of that, the Arctic is warming about 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. So that's where the heat is really coming in. Some parts of the Arctic are warming in Svalbard 7 times faster than the global average. That is, of course, causing a problem for the ice on the ocean, in the water, but it's also causing a problem for the ice sheets, which is Greenland particularly, which is one of the biggest contributors right now to global sea level rise, which again is causing threats to small island states and coastlines around the world. So the point from a perspective of legal frameworks of looking at how do we protect our waters, I would say the first part of that question is how do we protect our ice? How do we protect our frozen parts of the planet, particularly in the Arctic Ocean and the Antarctic, to ensure that we have a stable polar region, which will stabilize or certainly not amplify global climate change to the extent that it will if we don't fix it. Now, the Arctic is clearly, from a legal perspective, a place of huge legal challenges. There's many Arctic countries that are actively looking to claim territorial rights to shipping routes that are opening up, and also to oil, gas, and mineral extraction on those continental shelves, of which the Arctic has a lot of them. We see certainly a lot of geopolitical tension here with Russia claiming more and more territorial parts of the northern sea route. And we also are seeing a debate in legal terms over the use of heavy fuel oil, which is through the shipping routes. Now, again, heavy fuel oil is not good in any part of the world from a climate change perspective, but in particularly in the Arctic, it is really problematic because of the small particles that come out of that, which are dark in color and make the remaining ice melt that much faster. So from a legal perspective here, I guess I can't answer what Ecocide can do for the Arctic, but I would love to hear what the rest of the panel and Jojo thinks on that. I am encouraged by the work that Bangladesh has done on recognizing rivers in their country as persons, as legal persons. And I'm also inspired by the work that the Maori are doing with a campaign which is trying to establish the Antarctic as a legal person. And I'm wondering if we can do the same thing with the Arctic. So I'll stop my remarks there, and I look forward to hearing the rest from the fellow speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Whiteman, for the reminder that in order to protect and restore the overarching health of nature, we really must consider and protect water in all its forms, including ice and many others. All waters and natural systems are interconnected. I wanted to remind everyone that this event is being recorded and will be distributed by Stop Ecocide International on its mailing list, website, YouTube, and social media. So be sure to share it with friends once that happens. We now head south to the Amazon, where it is not only deforestation that is a major concern, but also pollution of the world's largest river and its tributaries. Julio Prieto is a lawyer specialized in environmental law, indigenous rights, and the rights of nature. Since 2005, Julio has been serving as a litigation attorney for Ecuadorian indigenous and peasant communities, fighting against oil pollution in the Amazon. He acted as investigator for the Ecuadorian Constitutional Court as well. Julio holds a master's degree in environmental management from Yale University, focused on global environmental governance and restoration ecology. He is currently an expert on Earth jurisprudence for the United Nations Harmony with Nature program. Julio is also acknowledged for his contribution to the independent expert panel for the legal definition of ecocide drafting process in 2021, where he translated for and collaborated with colleague and panelist Pablo Fajardo. Julio will be making his intervention in Spanish, so if you are listening in English, please choose English at the bottom of your screen in the interpretation section with the small little globe icon down there. And Julio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Grant. Oh, perdón. Voy a hacerla en español. Muchas gracias, Grant.
So I'm going to speak Spanish. Thank you very much, Grant, and thank you, Jojo. Thank you to all the speakers who have taken the floor before me. This is such an interesting topic. I'm honored to be here and to address you all. I would like now to share my screen to make a brief presentation in the next 10 minutes. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
So can you confirm that you can see the screen? We can see the screen, yes. Well, thank you again. I'm going to use the next 10 minutes to talk about the circumstances under which ecocide can play a critical role in the protection of our rivers. I'm talking here about the Amazon basin. We all know that this basin has critical importance for the planet, and I would like now to try to answer these questions. What would be the difference for the protection of our rivers if ecocide was recognized as a crime? Or even better, what would have been the difference in the past if ecocide would have been recognized some decades ago? This is just an exercise for academia, if you want. Sorry, yeah, the presentation seemed to disappear.
Oh, lo siento. All right. So to address these topics, it's very important to understand the importance of the Amazon basin for the world. And well, I believe that in a forum like this, it's not necessary to convince you that the Amazon plays a crucial role for for maintaining ecosystems and life. And this has a special importance because we're talking here about the place in the world where there's the most important biodiversity. Not only are we talking about the major carbon reserve, which is important for climate balance, but also all the water systems of the hemisphere. So pollution due to chemical substances and due to extraction activities, these are the main activities that are degrading the basin of the Amazon. So not only are we talking about spilling oil, but about systematically spilling substances like mercury, and we also have water projects that could potentially devastate entire ecosystems. So now, to understand the potential of ecocide to face these problems, we must first of all try to understand in a general manner what kind of requirements we have for this to become an international crime. We all know about the Statute of Rome, so I'm not going to dwell on this, but this is just for us to understand if some of the problems that the Amazon basin is facing could be solved with the recognition of ecocide the way it has been defined. So we must analyze when, against whom the International Criminal Court could start using its jurisdiction. We know that this is limited. The International Criminal Court could intervene only when the state against which serious damage and serious crime has been committed does not have a court that can face it. This is a complementary principle. Crimes could only be judged if they have been typified priorly. And here we wouldn't have a problem with temporality in this regard, but it's true that international law, international criminal law would be complementary. So where would the jurisdiction of International Criminal Law Court play? Well, only for this crime that has been committed by a national of a state party. So against whom? Well, trials are initiated against persons and not states. And what would the reason be? Well, for a crime that is committed and that is typified by the Statute of Rome. And that's why it's so important to reform the Statute of Rome to include the crime of ecocide. And we know that a case wouldn't be admitted by the International Criminal Court if this jurisdiction boundaries are not respected, or if there's a jurisdiction already in the state on which the crime is committed. Now, in what cases could ecocide be used to protect the waters of the Amazon basin? There are different assumptions under which we could apply international criminal law. For instance, when the damage that is caused under the definition of ecocide are legal in the state that receives this damage. I mean, there's no criminal law that typifies this in that state. Or whenever the activity has been permitted, so it is a legal activity, for instance, mining or hydrocarbon activities. It could also be the case that the state does not have the willingness or is not capable of prosecuting those responsible for this damage, or that the damage is cross-border. For instance, whenever we're talking about an oil spill or some mining activities that may affect more than one state, or whenever the damage goes beyond the borders of the country. Let's now see a couple of real cases of how this could have had an effect in past situations and how this may have an effect in present cases or even future cases. I'm going to refer to the Chevron affair, which is very well known, because we're talking here about the great environmental damage that a company caused by using practices and equipment that were obsolete and that were designed to maximize profit with the least investment possible. Now, those activities had led to a damage in the people because there were lots of substances spilled in the river. Now, if we analyze this under the criminal international law, and if we pretend that ecocide would have been incorporated in the Statute of Rome at the time of that case, well, then all the requirements would have been respected so that the International Criminal Court would have a jurisdiction. At the moment where Chevron was operating in Ecuador, there were no environmental crime in our legislation. In Ecuador, the regulations were very ambiguous, very broad. It was, I mean, pollution was prohibited in a generic manner, and it was only penalized from an administrative point of view. So environmental damage came with impunity. At the same time, Chevron appointed the authorities that had to control those activities. And the ministers in Ecuador, they were educated by Chevron to defend the interests of Chevron. So we're talking about authorities that did not have the willingness to penalize the damage caused by Chevron. So the pollution that Chevron was provoking has spread on 400,000 hectares in the Amazon jungle. It has affected the health of millions of living and human beings and creatures in that place. So we're talking about a damage that is widespread and long-term damage. So it does confirm the crime of ecocide. I'm sure that if at that time there had been a possibility that those responsible for this damage would have been prosecuted by an international court, I'm sure that if that was the case, the behavior of Ecuador would have been different because the responsibilities would have been much greater. And now it's too late. It's too late for this. But maybe it's not late to stop other cases of ecocide that are just now building up. For instance, the mining project called the Mirador, also taking place in Ecuador. This is the first approach that Ecuador has had with macro mining. So it's the first time we're approaching this kind of industry. And of course, our legislation is not ready for that. We do not know how to regulate the different risk factors for this kind of industrial activities. In the case of the Mirador project, 2 giant dams are being built in order to control some mining spills, which are toxic substances generated by mining activities. And this waste, this kind of toxic substance, cannot be treated. And that's why this toxic substance goes to huge reservoirs, and they're going to remain there forever. So it's millions of tons of toxic substances that are being put in a reservoir. And Ecuador has no regulations in order to set the boundaries or set the parameters that these companies have to follow. So we are weak in terms of our regulations. We have warned, the civil society has warned about the risk, but we have been ignored. And we wanted the company to tell us about the plans to build those dams, but they never tell us anything. And the government is accomplice to this, even though we think that this should be public information. We must also say that the government of Ecuador has promised to China total support for this project, so there's no willingness to penalize this or to do anything at all. So we're with neglecting authorities here. And this may provoke the destruction of different rivers, including the Amazon. These rivers could be covered by millions of tons of toxic substances, as it was the case in a Brazilian river not so long ago. In this case, the pollution would also affect Peru. It would reach the Amazon River, and it would even go to the Atlantic Ocean. If the crime of ecocide was a reality already, the government in Ecuador and the Chinese company would think twice before generating these risks. So these consequences are really falling upon those who make decisions. Now, in order to conclude, I would like to tell you about this reflection by Chico Mendes, which really comes along when we were listening about the Arctic, and we don't always think about it as water, but it's just the connection of all ecosystems. Amazon, it's not only Amazon, and it's not only important for the inhabitants there. Amazon is everybody, because whatever's happening in Amazon affects the entire world.
The crime of ecocide is fundamental in order to deter those who are going to provoke damage to the Amazon basin in a long term, in a widespread way. So my conclusion is that ecocide has a great potential to protect water, especially in cases of widespread, serious, permanent damage for which there are no other mechanisms for protection, or for which sometimes authorities are not ready to prosecute those responsible for those damages. So these two cases that I have presented very briefly could be covered by the proposed definition of ecocide. So I would like to say that ecocide would be a very useful legal tool to protect our waters and rivers and seas. It's the enormous potential of this international crime, and it's so important that it's so urgent to implement this. We need to stop the damage against our waters because, well, ecocide cannot solve the entire conflict, but if it was included in the Statute of Rome, it would be a good way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Julio. Your legal work on ecocide is crucial because it really breathes life into the theoretical ecocide framework and shows what it can look like in practice to protect water. We note that the UN Water Conference organizers have made particular support available for youth participation on the ground in New York, which is encouraging and important. And this event would not be complete without the involvement of the upcoming generation. The voices of youth are growing ever louder as a driving force in the global conversation around ecocide law. Here to tell us more is Amelie Wilkinson, a young environmental advocate based in Canada who has worked with Stop Ecocide for over a year. In that time, she founded Stop Ecocide Toronto, the movement's first city-level chapter, and became the youth ambassador and communications director for Stop Ecocide Canada. More recently, Amelie became the co-lead of Stop Ecocide's global Youth for Ecocide Law network. Outside the Stop Ecocide movement, Amelie is an undergraduate student at the University of Toronto, double majoring in international relations and peace, conflict, and justice studies, and currently working with a global research team that examines the social and ecological implications of lithium extraction for a clean energy transition. Amelie is passionate about environmental justice and youth voices from a global to grassroots level. Amelie, over to you.
Thank you so much. So I think I'm going to start off by talking about something that has been pervasive in all my discussions this week with people in the Youth for Ecocide Law Network and people working on the ground in Toronto. And that's the IPCC's sixth assessment synthesis report. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, this synthesizes findings since the last such report, which came out in 2014 and was a major input for the Paris Agreement. So it came out this week on Monday, March 20th. And for me, I first read the report at exactly 9:21 a.m. I was sitting in a building on the University of Toronto's campus, and I got this email alert from the Toronto Star with an article entitled, "The UN just released a landmark climate change report. Here's the grim timeline it gives us." Now, the really striking thing to me about the article, not just the report, was the way it opened. It read, "There's a girl sitting in a grade 5 class today. By the time she graduates from high school in just 7 years, the decisions the world makes around carbon emissions will determine the environment she grows up in." I read this, and while I've been talking about intergenerational justice for a long time, it really hit me that right now, young people can be using the education we're getting to put it towards action. I'm really lucky that I'm at the University of Toronto studying international relations at a time where there's still hope to change course. But in a couple years, if we don't act, no student is going to have that same luxury. And that's really a big fear in a lot of the conversations I've been having this week. And that's what I want to talk about. So I think the other panelists have done a wonderful job of explaining why water issues are important. As Jojo said, water is the lifeblood of the earth. Human bodies are literally made up of over 60% water, and all life is dependent on water to stay alive. Today, water insecurity is increasing around the globe, whether that be through droughts, the lack of enough water, whether it be through too much water like flooding, or the pollution of our existing supplies. And our global climate system is, of course, intricately linked with the hydrosphere and with the availability of global fresh water. Now, climate and breakdown and water insecurity are slowly becoming ubiquitous almost everywhere in the globe. I come from Vancouver, which is known as the rainy city. In 2021, we had massive droughts throughout the BC province that were really shocking to a lot of the residents. I think wherever you are in the world, water issues are becoming more and more visible. But that ubiquity plays out very differently depending on your existing vulnerabilities and where you are. We all know that climate change is a story of inequality. It's an inequality between countries, within countries, and of course, across generations. So for young and future generations, a lot of us have contributed very little to the climate crisis, but we're the generations that are going to be most impacted in years to come. Despite this disproportionate vulnerability, I think for a lot of people, it feels like we don't have access to the decision-making circles and to the levers of power that could actually make urgent change to safeguard our future and our right to water access. Now, today, the Earth is rapidly approaching and passing tipping points that will cause major catastrophes for future generations. And this is becoming an increasing source of strain on a lot of young people's mental health. I don't think it's always clear how big the magnitude of hopelessness has gotten. So I want to talk a little bit about an article I read recently. It was published in 2023 in the Journal of Climate Change and Health, and it talks about climate anxiety among Canadian youth. In particular, it surveyed about 1,000 Canadian young people ages 16 to 25. And the responses were that 78% said climate change impacts their overall mental health. 39% said they feel hesitation about having children because of climate change. But the one that really struck me was that 48% of Canadian youth said they believe humanity is doomed. That's almost half Canadian young people who responded that they think our generations and all of humanity does not have a future. Apathy, pessimism, and paralyzing fear, these are what a lot of generations, and especially young generations, are facing. And it's something that's been brought up to me increasingly in the past week in the discussions I've been having. So what I've been reflecting on in the face of this is how we can cultivate and maintain hope. There are a couple ways that I stay hopeful that I wanted to share right now. So the first one is just intergenerational solidarity. I think throughout my work, every generation working together is a source of solidarity that makes a lot of young people feel hopeful and feel heard. So two people that I really, really appreciate in this regard are Sarah Qualter, the executive deputy director of Stop Ecocide International, and Jojo Mehta, who are just incredible in terms of uplifting youth voices. But I also find hope through the youth teams I do work with. And one example is that on our Stop Ecocide team, we have someone named Mia Feldman. Now, we organized a climate strike in really early March through the University of Toronto, and Mia was on this organizing team. And they had just broken their leg about a week prior. Despite this, Mia had gone into surgery a couple days before the strike and still showed up. They rented their own wheelchair. It was icy outside. And despite accessibility obstacles, being in a lot of pain, they were there and they actually emceed our climate strike. This was just kind of an example to me of the degree of commitment that I see in all the people who I get to speak with and work with on a daily basis. And in that, I think we can find a lot of hope in each other. Third, I get a lot of hope from campaigns that call attention to the value of the earth and our water. It's really easy to forget in our capitalist societies, and especially in urban centers, just how much we're dependent on nature. But rights of nature movements that are growing worldwide that you've already heard about have really succeeded in bringing attention to the need to better value our ecosystems And they've already succeeded in giving rights to water systems like the Magpie River, the Klamath River, and many other river systems. They highlight the need to treat the earth and water not as a resource, but as an entity on which all life depends. And to challenge this conception of our earth as an infinite resource that serves only humans, I really believe in the power of law. So right now, our laws often prioritize really short-term profit over long-term sustainability. And of course, this allows us to destroy the earth recklessly. So to me, the solution is very intuitive. We need to change our laws. We need to be able to enforce the rights of living systems, and we need an ecocide law to be implemented around the globe. This is if not the major source of my hope, especially in past weeks when I've been seeing how action that is not mandatory has been failing to meet the urgency of the climate crisis. So Jojo already told you a lot about what the immense benefits of an ecocide law would be, but I think for me, an international law against ecocide would do even more than protect the planet. And this is something that's been repeated in a lot of the conversations I've had with members of Youth for Ecocide Law. To us, ecocide law would protect hope. I think it could be the basis on which we can rebuild trust in our decision makers. Ecocide law could be a global agreement that, yes, there are levers for change and that there is real commitment to ensuring that younger generations can have a livable future. So I want to leave off, because I know I'm taking a lot of time, with a quick last anecdote and a quote. Yesterday evening, we had our weekly calls for Stop Ecocide Toronto. And one of the things that came up in the meeting was the Willow oil extraction project in the US. And we started talking about the IPCC report and a lot of different things that young people feel are infringing on their rights to a livable future. And at one point, this got really hopeless. So we kind of pulled back and we said, how do we move forward? And one quote that gets me through when I get into those feelings is something that Greta Thunberg once said. It goes, yes, we need a system change rather than individual change, but you cannot have one without the other. If you look through history, all the big changes in society have been started by people at the grassroots level, people like you and me. In short, it is scary. And for a lot of young people, it is becoming scarier to be in this world and to be a generation that has to make decisions about our future, our education, our jobs, whether we want to have kids at a time where climate breakdown and the future of our earth is so uncertain. But change is possible. And we need to act now. We need to act together across generations towards an ecocide law that can hold our decision makers accountable when they destroy our futures. It's time to protect water systems. It's time to protect our climate. It's time to protect the rights of all future generations. Thank you so much for giving me a little bit extra time to finish there.
Wow, thank you so much, Amelie, for your leadership amongst youth and students and all generations, as well as your reflection on the immense climate anxiety faced by youth and others. I think your support of intergenerational solidarity and the other rays of hope that you described, and I see several people in the chat just really reflecting on the importance of hope, is something we can all leave here inspired by. We now move on to yet another perspective to look at the business world, in particular the apparel industry, which has for many years had a problematic relationship with water. Samada Patterson has not been able to join us today due to unforeseen travel complications, but we have an absolutely amazing, wonderful speaker who has stepped in to intervene on this topic. Sasha Ternent is a former fashion executive and now founder of Blue, an analytics platform optimizing sustainability for consumer products. Prior to Blue, Sasha worked with Fortune 500 companies to grow their global e-commerce presence. In 2019, she built a B2B sustainable merchandise company that launched one of the first US gold level cradle-to-cradle certified apparel products. Recognizing the need to optimize environmental and social demands, Sasha remains passionate about building digital tools to optimize supply chain management. Sasha, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks for that introduction, and thank you to all of the other speakers. It's been wonderful to hear all of your stories and all of the activities that you're doing to help bring the rights of nature forward. So from the business perspective, I mean, I'm not sure how familiar you all are with this statistic, but it is estimated that about 80 to 90% of the impact on the environment from business is coming from our supply chains. And when we think about water, that's specifically to do with agriculture, such as, you know, if there's toxic fertilizers and pesticides used, the nitrogen runoff that goes into waste streams or water systems, as well as with industrial processing, specifically within the fashion industry. One of our biggest impact hotspot areas is within textile dyeing. So, you know, there have been reports that I've read over the years that something like 2/3 of clothing contain carcinogens in them. So if you think, I don't know, you know, that was only one study, so I don't want to say that as a universal truth, but I'm sure there are some elements of that. So within dyes for clothing, there are known to be traditionally many toxic substances and heavy metals such as arsenic, lead, and mercury. So when using those and then putting them in these big machines and then letting the water back out into the ecosystem, obviously that's going to have a disastrous effect. Things such as distorting the natural pH of the water, the natural temperature, and then obviously letting those pollutants out destroys the aquatic life in the surrounding ecosystems. And what's really interesting is there are actually, and hopefully we can provide some hope. There are actually some businesses and factories out there who are doing really great things right now. And really inspirationally, you know, when you go and visit some of these factories, you can visually see the difference between the ones that are doing safe practices for the environment and the ones that are not. There was a time when I was doing some work in Porto in Portugal, and almost every single dyeing mill that I went to or water treatment facility or finishing house outside, you could see rivers and streams with, I don't want to give too much of a fairy tale story, but, you know, fish jumping out, sunflowers on the side, a very healthy, natural environment. So intuitively, you know that they're doing something right. So when deep diving on it, you know, I was working obviously with a lot of factories that do have a lot of certifications in place, such as the Global Organic Textile Standard, Okotex, Blue Sign, as well as in Europe, you know, they do have to follow REACH, which is another regulation. So when you see this, you see, okay, business can exist and it can do things in a way that isn't harmful to the environment, especially when, you know, they're banning the use of toxic materials within those water systems and ensuring that those water systems that they do use are on a closed loop system so that they're not constantly draining the local waterbed. So it's really a circular water system. Now, the problem that we have is that from my experience, and I know many other people in industry, is that that's not pervasive enough. And there are some lofty targets. I know some countries have said that they have targets to hit 70% closed loop water systems within a certain amount of time. Again, another problem happens where we don't have the monitoring to actually know whether those targets are being hit or whether they're just more talk. So again, you know, another issue that comes up is while there are some people doing good and there are some governments trying to make the right targets and goals, as a whole, the vast majority of people in the industry don't understand or don't particularly know what they should actually be targeting. So there are a ton of regulations and a ton of certifications, and regulations differ from country to country. And by no means is this an excuse. We are now at a cruxus point where we don't really have a choice anymore, and everyone needs to get on the boat and start learning this crucial information about what they need to be doing and what policies they need to be implementing into their business practice in order to ensure that it's safe for the environment. Now, the problem with that is there is no universal framework. So where I think that a huge help in terms of promoting rights for nature and legality around protecting water in this instance and conversation is to provide that framework on what those impact points actually are. So for instance, as I mentioned earlier, when talking about water, we need to make sure when we let water out into the ecosystem that it's clean, doesn't have excess nitrogen in it or phosphorus, that it's at a neutral pH, a neutral temperature, and that it's not harmful to the local water systems. And we do have the tools and technology to be able to test those things. So I think starting with providing that enforcement and structure of one universal framework that can trickle down so that all regulations can gather around. And interestingly, many of the regulations and certifications overlap quite a lot. It's fairly redundant for at least a large part of it from what I have seen. And a lot of it follows, I guess, the International Standards Organization. So now if we get this framework in place, businesses are all of a sudden going to have to realize, okay, we really have to start following this, but it's going to provide them the transparency that they need to understand what they need to be following and how they need to be talking to their manufacturers. So the second point I want to make, aside from creating this universal language and framework, is that for the most part, a lot of people who I speak to, when they understand what the consequences of their business actions are, they do want to make change. The problem they have, as Annalie already suggested, is that, you know, in business, your investors or shareholders demand quarterly results or annual results unless you're on a B Corp system or something else. And so they're very much at the behest of their profit margins. And if all of these, the implication of implementing laws and requiring, you know, the stopping of polluting into water systems and better agricultural practices will require investment. It doesn't come for free. And that can't all come from the manufacturing regions. It must come from the people who have the capital power to make the change. So with that, you know, at present, a lot of companies often are forced, well, I shouldn't say forced, but are often in a position where it's a race to the bottom in terms of price. I know everybody on this call obviously would feel strongly about that. But if that's the status quo at the present, how can we level the playing field for those that do want to do better? If there is a framework or law put in place where it has these requirements, then it means everybody's going to have to start putting these investments into infrastructure and practices in order to improve, which that means if everybody's doing it and everybody's going to have to start paying for it, it's going to be on the part of the brands working with the manufacturers as well as the local regulators and governments on how we can capitalize these projects to ensure the protection of the environment and better business practices. So I think, you know, there's no one-shot solution here. From my own personal perspective, I don't think any individual thing is going to do it. It's not going to come from business. It's not going to come solely from government or from law. It's going to come from everybody, and everybody needs to take accountability for their part in this and their responsibility and what they can do to help drive better business forward. By providing the legal framework for it, it puts a strong foot down that this is something that you are now going to be forced to do. So it's time to start figuring it out. And that's to the ones who aren't maybe already on the boat. To the ones who are on the boat already, saying we want to do this, it provides a lot more support for them to be able to go to the manufacturers in those countries and say, look, this is now becoming law. So, you know, work with us. If you can't capitalize these improvements, how can we work with you to help innovate? So I do believe, you know, altogether, I don't want to be a downer because there are a lot of people out there trying to do good things. And there are so many new technology and science coming out which are so much better for the environment. The tools and technology exist and they're improving, and they are the ones that are coming in new are working their way into scalability. So there's a lot going on. It's now just about multi-stakeholder buy-in and alliance and working together for this. Sorry, I think that's all from me.
Thank you so much, Sasha, for setting such an immensely positive example of how businesses and consumers can be held accountable for necessary environmental change. And, you know, humans are part of nature, and therefore the businesses we create are part of nature as well. And I think we just need to learn how business practices can innovate to harmonize with the rest of the natural world. And we got some good ideas during today's conversation. Now we've heard from all of our panelists who are live with us here today, but we have one very special contribution that we have saved until last, and that is a video message from the remarkable Sylvia Earle. a living legend for the environmental movement and a personal inspiration for my own work. Sylvia is a marine biologist, oceanographer, explorer, author, lecturer, and co-founder of Mission Blue, which unites individuals and organizations across the globe to campaign for a worldwide network of marine protected areas, or HOPE spots. She has been a National Geographic Explorer in residence since 1998. Sylvia was the first female chief scientist of the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and was named by Time magazine as its first hero for the planet in 1998. She is part of the group Ocean Elders, dedicated to protecting the ocean and its wildlife. We are privileged to have received a short video message in support of today's theme, which we will now play for you.
There is a real case to be made for recognizing ecocide in the International Criminal Court, right along with genocide. Both are, when you think about it, killing us, killing either directly or by really killing the environment. Killing is killing. And we have to recognize the loss of the ocean, the deep sea, the high seas, life in the ocean affects the lives, not just the livelihoods, but the life, our existence is on the line.
Wonderful. So thank you to Sylvia Earle for those inspirational words for today's meeting. That was our last speaker. And so esteemed members of the panel, we've heard from many perspectives, and I'm hoping to ask each one of you a question to build from some of the comments that you made, and also to draw from a couple of the questions during the Q&A. We have about 7 minutes left. And so first of all, I'm hoping that all of the amazing speakers can turn their video on and we can give them a round of applause for their incredible remarks and contributions here today. So for each of you, I'll ask a question. I think we have about 1 to 1.5 minutes per speaker. If you'd like to answer my question, great. If there's an urgent message that you'd rather share, you're also welcome to go off script. I don't think there's any formal rules. So with that, I see a hand up for actually the first person I hope to ask a question to, which is Mr. Sylvain Kalsakau from Vanuatu. And are you there?
Hi, yes.
Hi,
can you hear me? I just wanted to say that Vanuatu is proud to co-host today's virtual side event, and with Stop Ecocide International, a partnership that will no doubt continue to strengthen in coming years. And I thank the expert panelists for their excellent and fascinating presentations. And it is very clear that protecting our natural environment is everyone's business and responsibility, and we owe it to the generations ahead. So, and it's also very clear that our planet and our future are in crisis. So existing environmental protection laws are weak and poorly imposed, and concrete actions are urgently needed to protect the environment before it's too late. And ecocide becoming a crime will no doubt be an important tool in protecting our environment. And just wanted to be rest assured that Vanuatu will continue to construct a strong bridge needed between science and legal pathways to explore how best the state's parties of the Rome Statute can continue discussions on finding a legal recourse on the ongoing destruction to the natural environment. And one voice is now 26 voices. We need more voices in order to advance this campaign. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those words. And tying the event together like that is much more interesting and timely than my question. If I still could ask a quick question, it can just be a yes or no. There's this amazing movement to seek an advisory opinion or multiple advisory opinions on legal obligations for climate action from states. And so many countries have come out in support of this that it's really been amazing for me to see. And again, it can be yes or no, or you can elaborate. Do you think a lot of those same countries are the ones that are going to start coming out more strongly in favor of recognizing the crime of ecocide, the same ones that seek this advisory opinion?
I hope so. I hope so. And be rest assured that Vanuatu will continue to reach out to these countries in this regard.
Yes. Well, thank you again for your leadership in this space and for co-hosting the event today. On to Jojo. We heard about ecocide, but we also heard about quite a few other legal paradigms, such as the rights of nature and international law, ocean treaties. How can recognizing ecocide support and underpin these other laws and legal movements?
I think this is a really important question because while there is a big and varied body of law, as has been said earlier in the panel, it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but there's a lot of protective regulation in place. The problem is that it's poorly monitored, poorly reported, poorly enforced. And there's a bit of a situation where you have, companies will either, perhaps ignore it or not bother to do it, or, knowing that they're not going to be chased up, or because they can't afford to. There's a kind of competitive drive to sort of, produce more for less, and that leads to leaving aside the regulatory frameworks. But of course, that all looks very different when you have a criminal law that can underpin that. Because if your failure to complete your due diligence properly, or to, complete your impact assessments properly, or to actually look at the results of what it is that you're trying to do, and therefore you're in breach of those things, and you're actually threatening a sort of severe and widespread or long-term harm, then suddenly you're in the arena of criminal law, and that is a whole different ballgame. So, there's a way in which one of the biggest roles, I think, of this law is actually in kind of underpinning that existing body of law and having people take it more seriously. And that is a major cultural shift. It speaks to that kind of mindset change that we need to be, moving through. So yeah, I think it's super, super important.
Thank you, Jojo. On to Gail. So, how do we get people to care about elements of nature they might not see every day? And just for example, the Animas River goes through the community that I live in, and it's in the front page of the newspaper today because the pollution levels are higher than they should be, and everyone's talking about it. But I think ice is a little bit harder to get people to care about, but I'm sure you've thought through how it's possible, and I'm interested in what you've learned. And then relatedly, do you think ice is alive, a living entity, and we should start thinking about it that way?
Well, I'll answer the first question, the second question first. I think that when I did my PhD in the subarctic with indigenous James Bay Cree, they certainly did think ice was alive. And I was often told not to look at the ice during thaw when it was cracking up, because then the ice would take me now or in the future. So there are definitely communities around the world that do believe ice is alive. Myself, I don't know, but I do think that the idea of it being a legal person is an interesting one, because I'm not sure that a corporation is animate either, and that's already a legal person. So I would answer it that way. In terms of how do we get the ice out of the frozen parts of the world, Arctic Base Camp, which is a not-for-profit that I set up to communicate that science, does it in a few ways. First of all, we go to Davos, we run an event every year alongside the World Economic Forum to try and brief people at that level. But increasingly, what we're trying to do is reach out to, I've got my big dog in the background that is now trying to join the panel. He is an Arctic dog, so I guess he deserves to be, but I'll try to finish quickly. And so what we have done is we created an online platform called the Arctic Risk Platform, arcticrisk.org. I'll put it in the chat. And we try to curate the science, which is complicated and often written in ways that a lay audience doesn't understand. And increasingly, what we're seeing is really simple online ads to climate vulnerable countries like Bangladesh, Vanuatu. We've run ads. We've run them in Nigeria, California. We've run them all around the world. And we're getting probably 400,000 people visiting the website over the year, which for a science organization is a lot. I mean, it's not for Amazon, but it is for a science organization. So we are hoping that that's a route. But it certainly looks from the news that if I could use TikTok, that would be better, because it seems like they're doing a ton effectively on there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gail. Julio, new laws change social norms, and I think we've seen this with the rights of nature to some extent. Do you think that broad recognition of ecocide as a crime will also change the behavior of people and of corporations just because the legal system has evolved in this new way? How can that change just the way we act in our day-to-day lives?
Gracias por la pregunta, Grant. Creo que
Thank you very much for the question, Grant. Well, I think that in this regard, it's like we speak different languages. In terms of rights, we're talking about a global discussion on recognizing the rights of nature and of its elements. And Ecuador is pioneering in this because we have recognized, our constitution has recognized the rights of nature. And now we have a good case law, which is based in an ecocentric system. All environmental laws are anthropocentric, and because they only take care about the environment as long as it is related to human beings. We take care of the quality of water, the quality of the ground, the quality of the air, in accordance to human beings' needs. And with Pablo, we collaborated in the definition of ecocide, and we really emphasized that we need to put this ecocentric approach first. So it's not only when it matters to people that it matters. It's when there is a damage, an irreparable damage for the ecosystem, that it matters. Because we understand that the need to protect these resources of nature goes beyond whatever can be done by national legislations. So we are in an area that is not regulated, and here Ecocide could fill in some gaps, some legal gaps. I think that Ecocide and the rights of nature, which is also a program that is fostered by the United Nations, I think that these could be two tools that would be very important, not only to protect waters, but the entire planet balance, the entire balance of our ecosystems, water, ice, Amazon. We're all one, and balance is very delicate, and we cannot afford to ignore it from a legal point of view.
Thank you so much, Julio. Amelie, so you've been nurturing this amazing grassroots movement, including with youth and students, but also intergenerationally, as we learned. Just to all the students watching today, what can they do right now? And then to the professors watching today who are educators, what can they do right now to support?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We started 2 Septembers ago on University of Toronto campus doing some grassroots mobilizing with a lot of youth. And one of the first things we did was we started talking to people about the Stop Ecocide movement on the ground at the university and saying, like, have you heard of it? What do you think of it? For a lot of young people, the response we got was, of course, this should be a law. Why isn't it already a law? Only a couple people needed a bit more convincing after we explained the basic premise of the movement. But I think when you ask people why they don't act, it's a little bit different. For a lot of young people, the first problem is that the immensity of the climate crisis and the immensity of water issues can feel like very, very disempowering. And as a student, when you go to make change and when you go to access decision-making circles, you don't have a degree to back yourself up. You don't have job experience to say that your voice has power. And so it can be very disheartening to try to forward opinions and make change. For me, one of the things that helped a lot with that kind of apathy was simply doing one thing every day, even if it was a small thing, to move forward. I think the way a lot of people lose hope and lose momentum is just in sitting back and saying, I can't do anything because I can't do everything. So whether it's reading one news article, signing one petition, messaging a local group to see how you can get involved, just moving forward is the biggest thing. If people are interested in joining the Youth for Ecocide Law Network, we have a WhatsApp group, and you can join it through the Youth for Ecocide Law website, which I think someone just sent in the chat. And so for me, that community has been really important. But I think the biggest message I would say to students is that you don't have to do everything to do something. There are a lot of us, and there are a lot of people doing things around the globe. So the power is really in just joining with others and finding solidarity within the movement. Educators are also a big part of that. I think what educators, the biggest thing that they can do is A, tell the truth and provide students with the equipment they need to actually act. And to an increasing extent, education about the climate crisis and environmental issues is available to a lot of people, especially in the English language, but there are some groups doing really amazing work on making sure that information is translated to every language in which it needs to be accessible, and that is accessible in both online forums and in-person forums. So for educators, just making sure that young people are equipped, and then also just continuing to press forward the importance of youth voice and continuing to push for change is a big thing. But that's the main thing I'll say. I don't want to take too much more time.
Thank you so much, Amelie. And to round things out, Sasha, so, businesses do want to make change. I think you're an example of that, but their investors and shareholders, as you said, demand quarterly or annual results in many cases. Do you think businesses should look several generations ahead when they're deciding on how to operate and where their supply chains come from and so forth? And do you think doing that would actually be good for business?
I'm so glad you asked this question. I feel very strongly about this. Yes, I absolutely think they should. I don't know who on this talk has read Natural Capital by Paul Hawken. It was probably the book that first got me interested in this in the first place. And if you think about the Industrial Revolution and how we started, I don't like a carrot and stick approach to business when we're talking about sustainability, because I think it really puts people off and it doesn't inspire them to make change. It makes them feel like, okay, well, I'm just going to stick to what I'm doing, because if I can't be part of your movement, then like, forget it. So I think, if you look more at the natural capital approach and say, like, just think about it logically. Like when we started the Industrial Revolution, that was, what made sense. It was a natural progression. I'm not saying I'm for or against that, business model, but it was the flow. Now it's time we have the resources, technology, knowledge, communication between each other, and to everybody that, if you're in the Western world and you're offshoring all of your manufacturing, 20 or 30 years ago, you probably were not aware of how those things were being made. Now you don't really have that same excuse. There's so much information in your face all of the time. So I think now is a time when let's not talk about all of the things that have gone on in the past and make people feel horrible about their part in it. Let's look at what we can do to start working together, to start building the world that we all so desperately want to live in. I think by taking the environment and humans into the balance sheet, that is, for me, the way forward. You should not be able to extract resources and raw materials from the planet without reinvesting back into them and making sure that they can go on in perpetuity. You should not be able to pollute into the water and into the oceans with zero retribution, thereby destroying the very livelihood that is keeping, the very thing that's keeping our planet alive. This makes absolutely no sense. It just doesn't make sense. If you think about it, you were destroying, in the short term, the ability for your business to be able to go on in the long term. I think, what Jojo was touching on earlier about law and the criminality of it is actually, if we want to go this route, if you can provide or turn it over in courts, actually for businesses now, it's, a legal risk lawsuits. It's also, you might get really high insurance premiums if you don't have the right supply chains and protections and due diligence in place. At Blue, what we are building is the system to be able to monitor supply chains, because the brands currently, unless you are large enough to have a team of internal specialists, and this is not easy stuff to understand. It's science and engineering and technology. So you cannot expect, and in defense of some companies, you can't expect them all to come ready and equipped with the knowledge to make the change. So we're providing and building a platform which will allow them to, one, understand, what's going on, two, understand, benchmark, gold case study, what you can do to make better, and three, hopefully create the connections between different stakeholders to be able to make those changes. So yes, in short, natural capital all the way. Love Japanese business models. Keep them going for over 100 years. Your shareholders and their grandchildren will love that.
Thank you so much. Wow. Okay, well, that brings us to a close. So a huge thank you to today's distinguished speakers who all shared so much knowledge with everyone here. A huge thank you to the co-host, the Republic of Vanuatu and Stop Ecocide Foundation for making this happen. Thank you so much. Thank you also to the UN 2023 Water Conference. And please remember that we will make today's recording available. I also encourage everyone to think about immediately after this meeting, how can you get involved in the Ecocide movement in any way? I encourage you all to do so. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.